Hi, I'm Amanda Yallop.
And I'm Huon Hooke.
And this is The Real Review. The wine we're tasting today is the Roederer Brut Rosé, vintage 2014.
So the House of Louis Roederer is one of the most distinguished houses in Champagne. It's a family-owned house. It has always been owned by the same family. It is quite a large house, considering it's family-owned. And the amazing thing is the amount of their own vineyards that they have. 70%, I think, of their fruit requirement they provide themselves out of 242 hectares of vineyards. And would you believe that more than half of that is Grand Cru? That's an extraordinary figure. And these days, I'd say a bit more than half of it is organically certified. I think they're trying to manage all of their vineyards organically, and a lot of them are biodynamic as well. But certified, I think 115 hectares of that are currently certified as of this year. 3 million bottles a year. It's not small. They are most famous, of course, for the Cristal, which is that beautiful wine in the clear bottle, which is quite expensive and quite wonderful. But everything they do, I think, from the ground up is really, really high quality. And a lot of the credit, I think, for the greatness of this house can be given to the fact that it's owned by the same family, the Rousseau family, for a long time. And the winemaker for the last 20 years or so is a guy called Jean-Baptiste Lecaillon, who is one of the stars of Champagne. And we in Australia who know Jean-Baptiste sort of think that we own a little piece of him because he worked in Australia before he started work at Roederer. And he made the very first Jantz wines in Tasmania, going back to the late 80s. A long time ago now, and he's come a long way since then.
Absolutely.
It is an excellent company. They are strong on Pinot Noir, but they're also big on Chardonnay. They're a bit of an all-round company in terms of their style. They use a bit of oak in their winemaking. I think all their reserve wines are aged in large old vats. Everything they do, they think about in great detail.
They own quite a large proportion of their vineyards, don't they?
70%.
For a Grand Marque, that's extraordinary. A lot of the Grand Marques own a very, very small amount and buy a huge amount. But by owning 70%, they've got a lot of control of the vineyards. Hence, they've got 115 odd hectares with organics. And everybody knows organics is the elimination of negative practices in the vineyard and in the winery. There's a huge push for that. Consumers love it. Producers love it. Agriculturally, we want to have that sort of idea. It's not a guaranteed result, but I think that when you look at the stable of wines from Louis Roederer, you can see the quality.
You can. And I've heard Jean-Baptiste interviewed about it, and he says he's not necessarily a believer in burying cow horns and phases of the moon and everything like that. He just tastes what's in the glass. And when he notices that it's better from the biodynamic vineyards, and he does notice that, then that's enough for him. And the fact, of course, that they're not putting poison into the soil, which is quite important too. Very important.
Absolutely. Well, it's the health of the soil that makes the difference. You know, that biodynamics is that little bit further from organics in the fact that it's not just the elimination of negative practices in the vineyard and the winery, it's the specific actions that are implemented according to the calendar of the zodiac, which sounds a bit like witchcraft. But if you're a believer. But the fact is, when they see the life in the soil, they don't know why exactly it's doing that, but they can see the health of the soil is fantastic, which is incredible, I think. For me, the wine, it's got a lovely sort of colour, that onion pink colour, very almost a tinge of copper orange. I do think it's got lovely sort of aromas. You can smell pomegranate, a little bit of cranberry. For me, you get that lovely sort of mandarin orange oil, sandalwood. It's quite spicy. It's really sort of perfumes. But on the palate, you get a little bit of stone fruit, more of that yellow peach rather than white peach. So it's a little bit riper. Essentially, it's a rosé because the colour's been bled from the skins, or they've added a little bit of Pinot Noir, and I think they've added a Pinot Noir to give it that colour. But it's quite a moderate wine. People always think rosé is sweet. This is actually a dry style wine. It's moderate in body, not moderate in quality.
It's very dry, isn't it?
It is. It has a crisp, almost a dryness on that grip on the palate. It's quite prominent, which I don't remember from the last time I had it, but I don't think I had the 14 before the last time I tried the Roederer Rosé. I love it when you try something new. It's a little bit more fun.
Yeah, according to my numbers, it's 63% Pinot Noir, 37% Chardonnay, and 17% is fermented in oak barrels. and 30% of it has the malolactic fermentation, which means that it's decreasing the acidity slightly, but that means 70% of it didn't. So it's got quite fresh acidity, hasn't it? It's got a friskiness to it.
If I didn't know that it was 63% Pinot Noir, I wouldn't think that, because I think it has a lightness to it. It has a brightness to it, which I expected it came from Chardonnay.
How do we rate this wine? Well, we scored it 94 out of 100, which is a really good score. It's fresh onto the market, the 2014. We don't have a rating vis-a-vis all the rest of the wines of Champagne just yet, but I can guarantee you it's going to rate pretty highly as a rosé vintage wine. For drinking, it's still quite a young wine, I think. At 6 years old, it's still just starting to be a really good wine to me. I mean, Roederer wines last and last and last. And I think that most of them are improved by keeping them for a year or two before you drink them.
Yeah.
And I know people amongst my circle who buy a case of Roederer every year and they don't drink it for a year or two. They drink the last year's or the year before's because they reckon it's so much better with a year or two extra age on it. And I totally agree with that.
I would agree. I think that when we talk about aging in wine, particularly when you're looking at vintage champagne, essentially it's a very slow decay that just adds something to the wine. When it still has that freshness, it just adds that extra little bit of complexity, which I quite enjoy.
But I think the Roederer style is all about this piercing crispness and vitality and ability to age for a long time. I think it's just... they're not roll over and tickle my tummy kind of wines. They're wines for real enthusiasts.
I would agree. For the food match, Louis Roederer have actually come back and they've suggested having chicken or veal with morel mushrooms in a white or a cream sauce with potatoes and green beans, or perhaps a raw fish carpaccio. They're talking kingfish or ocean trout served with a whitlock salad, dressed in a little bit of olive oil and chevril. They've gone to quite a bit of detail, so I think they've practiced their eating and drinking quite a bit. People also have it with roast pork, potatoes, fresh pear compote and Tuscan kale. A lot of people in the past, when they've had a rosé champagne, they've always had it with desserts. When really, I love rosé champagne with pork, with chicken or with duck. You can have any sort of game as long as it's not too rich. It's the garnish that's going to add the richness. I mean, on the edge, if you had a really big rosé, I'd have it with duck pancakes. I do think there's flexibility to play with. But when you have rosé, I do like a touch of greenness. When you have, whether it's green beans or whether you're having a leaf salad, or if you have have chives or spring onions, just adds a bit of freshness. And if you don't have any of those things, add parsley.
Okay,
parsley.
Fine. Yeah, I'm not a great parsley lover, but I do.
I definitely am. I do
think that the pork is great. And then if anybody says you shouldn't have champagne with red meat, pork's white meat, I suppose, but it really, really goes well.
It goes well.
And the crispness and the crisp acidity of this wine will cut through the fat of the pork beautifully.
I do think it's almost like the last hurrah to get over with food and wine matching. When people talk about wine, they've got very, very solid set ideas they don't want to move away from. But I think when it comes to food and wine matching, it's like the last gate people are trying to press past. They're looking at, I'll have it with beef Wellington, I'll have it with salmon en croûte, I'll have it with lovely sort of dishes. But really, you could have a lovely champagne with just some cheese or some crackers or some olives. It depends on what you're drinking, obviously. You don't have to have a huge meal to have a bottle of champagne. You can just enjoy it in the moment.
Cheers, Amanda.
Cheers.